Okay, I think let's get started. So, a big hello and welcome back to all of you who've just joined us in the last few moments. So, as you know, we're here again for our second part of the two-part workshop on gender equality in capital markets. So, great to see so many of you reintroducing yourselves in the chat. So, feel free to keep saying hello. But let's dive in and get started. So, lots to cover today, and hopefully, some interest to keep going and following up on the topic after Monday's session. So, a big thank you to all of you again for joining us in today's training, and to the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange for hosting us in today's training session. And of course, again, to the UNSSE's partners on this program, IFC, UN Women, Columbia University, and the Luxembourg government. Okay, so for anyone who might have missed part one of the training, you'll be able to find the recording of this session on the SSE event page for this webinar. So we'll share that link in the chat to you multiple times throughout the training. But just as a reminder, that webinar page or event page for the session is also where you'll be able to find the slide handout presentations from both parts of the training and for all of the guest speakers as well. So make sure to check that out if you'd like to look at any of the materials that we're sharing with you today. Those materials as well include hyperlinks to all of the different resources that we're sharing with you in the chat. So a good source to collate all of that information. So just a quick housekeeping reminder, which you're probably familiar with from last time. As participants, you're muted, but please do make sure you're making use of the chat to share any general comments or discussion as you're doing now. And if you have particular questions for us as we're moving through the training, please make sure to use the Q&A box for your questions. You can also do that anonymously if you'd like to, and feel free to vote as well. If you see someone else's question that you'd like to make sure we answer, you can give it a thumbs up as well to make sure we prioritize responding, but we'll aim to get back to all of our questions in writing as we move through the training. So don't be shy and feel free to ask those questions. In terms of our format today, we're following the same approach as we did last time. So we've got a 2-hour session together today. Please make use, as we said, of that live opportunity to ask your questions. And we'd love to get your participation in the training session as well. So it was great to have so much really rich discussion in the chat and the exercises last time. So it'll be great if we can keep that up today as well. And finally, you'll be pleased to know that you can receive a completion certificate for taking part in the training at the end of part two of the training today. So if you stay tuned for the information about that at the end, we'll explain how to get your certificate, which will involve filling out a feedback survey that we'll share with you at the end. And so just to reintroduce and introduce some new speakers to you today as well. So I'm joined again, myself, Fiona, by my colleague Landon at the UNSSE Academy team. We're pleased as well to welcome back Miwa Park from the UN Women team to carry on our conversation about the women's empowerment principles. Thanks, Miwa. Hello. And later on in our training session, we're pleased to be joined by two guest speakers as well. So firstly, we'll be joined by Guillaume Jacques from the Luxembourg Stock Exchange, who's going to be speaking to us about gender bonds and the work that LuxSE are doing on that topic. And secondly, we'll also be joined towards the end of our training by David Pritchett, who's the Managing Director of the EDGE Certified Foundation. You might remember we touched on EDGE a little bit on Monday as a gender certification scheme that can be applied in workplaces to help you understand the right practices and systems to put in place. So David will be here with us later on to explain a little bit more about that. Okay, so just to dive into the content structure again and explain to you a little bit as well what we'll be covering today. So, as a reminder, we've got those 4 modules that we cover in the course, and these have really been designed to help you walk through those 4 different steps for improving gender equality performance for global markets. And so today we're going to be focusing on those second 2 steps you see there, all around implementation and communication. And so this is building off what we learned last lesson. So hopefully you were able to join us for that. And so an important point to note here, of course, that this is an ongoing process. So although once you've started communicating your gender performance, you've reached the end of this 4-module structure, of course, that doesn't mean you're done. And we know that in reality, this is going to be a continual process of improvement. So we present these steps in sequence here, but of course, you'll be working across all of them, perhaps in parallel. And so for today's training in particular, we have two key objectives linked to those areas of implement and communicate that we'd like to help you achieve. So firstly, we'd like to help you to understand how you can capture market value for gender equality performance. So that could be through gender smart investment strategies or through the creation of gender focused financial products. And secondly, we'd like to help you today to communicate gender-related information with your different stakeholders for effective communication. And so identify the different guidance you can use for communicating this information with external stakeholders, including what investors are looking for in corporate reports, and also how you can integrate gender into your procurement and supplier engagement approaches. And so to achieve these objectives, this is just to show how our agenda breaks down across the time together today. So again, we'll spend a roughly equal amount of time on our two units. We'll have a little bit of a break in the middle, and then we'll wrap up at the end with some final resources and takeaways for you. So as we've said, please do ask your questions using the Q&A throughout that structure, and we'll respond to them as we go. But to get us started, similar to what we did last time, we'd like to get a sense on those different areas we're covering today, maybe how familiar or how comfortable you are with understanding those already. So we'll go back again to Menti now to get your thoughts on that and also to test your understanding on a little thing that we covered last time as well. So I'll share the Menti screen here, and I'll just ask Landon if he could please share the link. Thanks, Landon. So that link is available to you in the chat now to follow through to Menti, to this exact question. You can also use that QR code you're seeing at the top of my screen now. And finally, you can go to menti.com and enter that 8-number code that you see at the top of my screen as well. The first question, as I've said, is just to let us know your current level of comfort on these three different areas. So identifying the value that gender equality can add to investment strategies, communicating gender-related information to investors, and finally explaining to colleagues the financial value of gender equality. So thanks everyone for voting so far. So it looks like most of you are sitting somewhere around the middle of the scale on these different areas and perhaps a little bit below the midpoint. I know last time I think we had some stronger levels of comfort and confidence perhaps on the corporate side of things and some of the terminology, but maybe good to know that the finance side of things is perhaps a little bit newer. So thanks everyone for sharing that. And so the second question I have, just to get us started, is a little bit of a test on a small point, or maybe an important point actually, that we covered from last time, just to test whether you'd understood that. Okay, I see lots of you ready to go, so let's start the quiz. So question will just pop up for you now, and you'll have a few seconds to think about your answer and respond. But the question is our objective here equity or equality? You might remember that we talked about both of those terms last time, but have a think and see if you can remember what our overall objective is here. And we'll go into a little bit of a recap on why that is shortly. Okay, see lots of you have responded. Just a final 10 seconds to have a think and take a guess if you're not sure. Okay. Ooh, so it was very close, but the 30 of you that went with equality were indeed correct. That was the core objective of this, although equity is an important part of that equation. So let's just go back to the slides now, and I'll have a little look at that with you to show you a reminder on those points. So this is the diagram, if you remember, that we talked about last time, where we have equality as the sort of central component and objective here. Of course, equity, as we said, is a part of that equation, but what we really need is diversity, equity, and inclusion together in order to ultimately achieve equality. So diversity, if you'll remember, is all around having that seat at the boardroom table. Excuse me. Equity is around that equitable distribution and redistribution of power within the organization. And finally, last but not least, we also have inclusion. So that's around ensuring that every individual feels welcomed and has equal opportunities to participate in what the organization does. So if we put all that together, we could say that diversity is kind of that seat at the table within the room. Equity is the microphone that provides you with the ability to speak. And finally, inclusion is all around maybe that interpretation or headset that allows everyone to understand each other and feel welcome. So that's just a quick recap on that important concept that sits behind a lot of what we're talking about here. But just to quickly review a couple of key points as well that came out of our training from last time. So you'll remember that we learned about some of the important benefits that we'll see from achieving gender equality. And what was important to say here was that these can be benefits for businesses, but also, and for women themselves, but also that there are benefits for wider society and the economy beyond the boardroom and the corporate environment. So, for example, we see that in studies, we show that if there's more equality for gender, we can see increased kind of societal cohesion, more economic productivity, and lower rates of violence. And if you remember, Miwa also took us through the women's empowerment principles, and we talked about those 7 different principles that you can use to help you get started on this topic. So, as a reminder, one of those principles that you'll see as number 7 on the list there is measurement and reporting. And so that was something important, I guess, to come back to today. And we'll be talking a bit more around that topic in particular. And a final reminder was around the importance of corporate culture. So, if you remember, we covered that case study exercise with Owl Inc. and Peacock PLC, and we showed how actually the different practices and behaviors that they implemented can actually have quite a significant impact on the achievement of gender equality goals. So, just a reminder, of course, that the importance of communication from the top, of setting that correct tone, and really taking a roots and branch approach to looking at this across your organization is really important. Okay, so that's a bit of a recap and whistle-stop tour of what we covered last time, just to remind you of a few key points. So now we're going to be transitioning into the third unit of our training, which looks at gender lens finance and the market mechanisms that can support these principles that we've talked about already. And so for that, I'll be handing over to Landon.
Great. Thanks so much, Fiona, and good to be with you again today for part 2. So, as Fiona mentioned, we're going to be looking at implementation of gender equality, and we'll talk a bit more about products that support market action, and we'll also look at some mechanisms that add value and promote gender equality in capital markets. Let's start by looking at how financial products are used to support gender equality and what opportunities lie within those financing mechanisms for gender-allied companies. To get started, we're going to look at some of the trends we're seeing more broadly in sustainable finance. So to start, apologies, just a couple slides behind. There we go. To start, we can look at a previous UNCTAD World Investment Report, which shows that in 2024, the number of sustainability-themed funds worldwide has grown significantly over the last number of years. We do see the rate of growth slowing down a bit since 2021. However, the total still stands at about 7,500 funds, up slightly from 2023, and those funds are worth over 3 trillion USD. I'll note, as some of you who are looking closely at the charts might notice, you do see a slight dip in 2024 in global net investment flows to sustainable funds. But it's important to note that this decline was a result of different factors like depressed asset values, rising interest rates, poor market returns, and the looming risk of a recession in many markets around the world. So with that, we're seeing a lot of significant growth in gender lens investing, but this data on gender lens investing is more difficult to measure. So we have less clear of an idea of the exact magnitude of funds that consider these factors instead of sustainable funds as a whole. We don't have enough time to totally dive into the gender funds topic today, but we have provided you with some extra slides in your handout, which we've linked the handout URL before in the chat. So if it's something you wish to look into more, please check out the handout slides after the workshop today. A natural question you might be asking yourself is, what is gender lens investing? Because I know I've already used that term once or twice. So let's take a quick moment to discuss that. And before I give the kind of official definition that we use, I'd ask if you could please share what you think gender lens investing means or what it is, how you define it in the chat. So I'll give you a few seconds. And there's no points for being right and no points for being wrong, so all answers are welcome. Okay, quiet group this morning. Would love to see some answers come in, even if it's just a few words that come to mind or a quick working definition. I see Ria said investing decisions made to promote gender equality. Okay. Another participant notes investments that are targeted at a particular gender. Okay. And Carla is noting gender analysis is factored into the investment decision. Um, okay. You're seeing lens come up a lot, focusing, making investment choices that take gender into consideration. Great. Yeah, a lot of good answers there. So it seems like a lot of you on the call already have a good idea of what gender lens investing is. So those are all great answers. We will look at an official definition now, but again, there's different working and official definitions. But the Global Impact Investing Network defines gender lens investing as investment strategies applied to an allocation or to the entirety of an investment portfolio, which seek to examine gender dynamics to better inform investment decisions and or intentionally and measurably address gender disparities. So, as the name Gender Lens Investing makes clear, gender is a lens. I saw a lot of folks noting that, and it's a way of seeing that helps an investor to highlight opportunity, illuminate risk, and understand strategy in a more nuanced way. So, I think a lot of you were pretty accurate there. So, well done. Now, you might ask, how are investors already using that gender lens to make investment decisions? So there's many different strategies, some of which you see on your screen. Some of the core strategies we'll look at specifically at what focus an investment strategy with a gender lens takes, and often we'll see a combination of multiple or all of these strategies to varying degrees used by investors. The most common strategy you might be familiar with is a focus on leadership. That's something we talked a lot about in part one, looking at corporate leadership. But there's other areas that we see investment strategies focusing as well, such as employees, supply chains, products and services, or community. At the firm level, fund managers can drive the adoption of gender lens or gender smart investing by starting within their own investment house. So, fund managers can strengthen the gender diversity of their own teams, for example, by the leadership setting clear targets or building a respectful workplace culture or making public commitments to gender diversity. The SSE partner, the IFC, they've also developed a framework that we'll link to in this slide that includes designing a gender smart investment strategy, engaging, training, and rewarding people within the firm, enhancing or adapting investment processes and systems, and identifying and collaborating with partners and external stakeholders at the firm level. At the portfolio level, fund managers can adopt strategies in both origination and portfolio management. So those strategies can enable fund managers to allocate capital to companies that are committed to these five key areas on your screen. Again, women's representation and leadership, often they're looking to founders, co-founders, and senior executives or senior management. They may be looking for a gender diverse and equitable workforce, a gender inclusive supply chain or value chain, or offering and designing products or services that consider the distinct needs of women and girls and ensuring their operations do no harm to women in the community. So the good news is that the benefits of gender diversity have become more widely recognized, and investor demand for gender smart or gender lens investment opportunities has increased considerably. This has led to the emergence rather of a variety of gender-focused financial products across asset classes. So, oh, apologies. I think I mixed up the slides just a little bit, but that's okay. So, we're going to move along. I just want to highlight gender-themed financial products when we're talking about different ways to invest in gender equality. And before we dive into some case studies, so I want to share a bit about an SSE IFC publication we released last year. This report provides a global inventory and analysis of about 300 gender-themed financial instruments, including bonds, equity funds, and indices across both developed and emerging markets. I'll note a few key insights. We saw gender-themed financial products. They still remain niche. That is not to say that they're not important, but they are niche compared to the broader bucket of all the other financial instruments out there in terms of asset values. Also, index and market benchmark-based tools comprise a substantial share, and often those market benchmark-based tools, or always those market benchmark-based tools, they don't actually have a financial value attached to them. Rather, they're knowledge products, so they're not actually investable assets as well. Then I'll note government-issued gender bonds are particularly prominent in emerging markets, and then we see gender-themed equity funds that hold relatively low asset values, and then they are also inconsistently aligned with the women's empowerment principles. And a bigger issue we see here when we were doing this report was the absence of standardized definitions, reporting frameworks, and taxonomies, which can contribute to concerns about gender washing, where gender labels may be used without demonstrating real impact. So the report urges greater integration of gender equality into sustainable finance taxonomies, stronger verification mechanisms, and alignment with the Empowerment Principles and Sustainable Development Goal 5 or SDG 5 on gender equality to ensure that these gender-themed investments and products deliver meaningful outcomes and impacts. With that, we'll look now at a few case studies that can help us better understand some of these real-world examples of gender products. So first up, we have a case study on the dual benefit bond, oh, apologies, I got mixed up on slides. So we're going to start by looking at the gender responsive carbon credits or the gold standard. So with that, I think we briefly mentioned in Monday the Longo Safe Water Project in Uganda, and this is a perfect example of how climate and gender benefits can work in tandem. So in 2020, this became the first ever project to receive a gold standard certificate on gender responsive certification. So they are rehabilitating boreholes and providing clean water to about 40,000 people, and this also cuts 50,000 tons of CO2 every year. The social impact is where this project really stands out. So we saw households saving 4 hours a week on water collection. Time gained back is almost exclusively for women and girls who in the community are responsible for more of the water collection. The water resource committees have reached almost parity with 46% female representation, so they're having their voices heard. And most strikingly, reported domestic violence related to water collection has dropped from about 35% down to zero. As well, almost every woman surveyed is now using that saved time for income generating activities. So there's an extra economic benefit as well. It's important to note that while gold standard requires all projects to be gender sensitive, the project went a step further to become gender responsive. That means they move beyond just doing no harm to actively setting targets that also reduce gender inequality. For anyone looking to buy credits, the project offers high intensity carbon reductions that are also rigorously vetted for verified social impact. Now we'll move to the dual benefit bond. So the next example is the integration of dual benefits or co-benefits of financial products such as bonds. And this is the world's first gender equality loan, where the Turkish company Polat Energy received a $44 million loan in 2019 to finance the construction of Turkey's largest wind farm. However, rather than just issuing a green bond, the company also integrated gender equality metrics, and its performance will be annually assessed based on a series of gender criteria. And it was also agreed that the improvements will enhance the terms of the loan. So, criteria include actions such as return to work programs for employees returning from maternity leave, ensuring gender equality in new hires, prioritization of woman-owned enterprises in the supply chain, as well measures to avoid gender pay gaps, policies to prevent harassment, and trainings to overcome unconscious bias, negative bias against women. And the score, which will be calculated according to this methodology, which was developed by Guarantee BBVA, will also reveal the gender equality performance of Polat Energy along its entire value chain. Guarantee BBVA will also be ready to support Polat Energy with their own HR department in settling or setting relevant policies and procedures if there's any need for that too. In addition to rewarding Polat Energy for improving gender equality, the gender loan also seeks to encourage other sustainable infrastructure companies to adopt gender inclusive practices and serve as an example to other financial institutions. We're also seeing some similar metrics and financing considerations being integrated into carbon credits, such as through the W plus standard, which allows for the accreditation of carbon projects and credits that are issued to be certified with quantifiable contributions to women's empowerment. There's one more example which we won't have time to dive into today. It's on gender bonds. You can review this in your handout. The example comes from the IFC and their Banking on Women program, but I do really recommend taking a moment to check out the IFC's Banking on Women website, as they have a lot of great examples and resources there. But in the meantime, we'll keep going and we'll dive a bit deeper into what exactly it means to list or invest in gender bonds.
Super, thanks for that, Landon. So, as we said, now we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive and look at this type of bond and what it can mean. So, I'll provide a quick introduction to this topic before I introduce our real expert on this, Guillaume from Luxembourg as well, Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So, really just covering the basics here. So, as you can see, if we look at the sort of overall landscape of bonds, gender-focused bonds are considered a subset of bonds within the overall green, social, and sustainability bond universe. So, usually, gender bonds today are not seen as a distinct category of bonds themselves, like perhaps we might see for green bonds. But increasingly, we are seeing more bonds that have a gender focus, either by setting distinct KPIs related to gender or linking to projects that support or enhance gender equality, as we saw in those examples just there. But what I do want to highlight here is that we're also seeing a distinct overlapping with green bonds for climate and gender co-benefit, as we saw particularly with that gold standard case study. So if we take a look at the debt markets overall, we can see, if we're looking at this data from the UNCTAD World Investment Report again, that there has been a growth in sustainable finance through social bonds in the last 5 years. And so this data shows that the cumulative global issuance of sustainable bonds reached a record level of $1 trillion in 2024. And also, although we've seen declines since 2020, this was found to be in line with the broader bond market, so not a distinct decline in sustainability bonds or social bonds per se. But ultimately, we're seeing that social and mixed sustainability bonds are on a longer term growth trajectory. So if we look over the period 2019 to 2024, we've seen a nearly 20% increase in that time frame. So whilst we might be, as we said, more familiar with talking about green bonds, it's important to notice that specifically over this time frame, the data from the World Investment Report notices that there's been that particular uptick in social bonds and sustainability bonds. And they now account for over a third of the total sustainable bond market. So, if we're going to be issuing a bond, or perhaps we're an organization who wants to invest in bonds, there are a number of different guidelines that we can use to help us determine what actually qualifies as a gender bond. And so, importantly, these guidance documents are useful from both those perspectives, either as an issuer or an investor. So, you can see these two examples on the screen of relevant guidance here. So, firstly, we have the social bond principles, and these provide guidelines for issuing social bonds. And then we also have the Climate Bonds Initiative's methodology, which is around determining whether to include a bond in its social and sustainability bond database. But what I think is probably most important to highlight about this guidance is that they're designed to help build trust in the market and ensure that social bonds are aligned with achieving the intended positive outcomes that they claim to. So, of course, it isn't just enough to call something a gender bond. We need to really put in place the right measures, reporting processes, and metrics to help us to understand whether we're achieving that intended impact and to report back on that. And so, with that in mind and that brief introduction to the topic, we're going to look a little bit more in practice at this with our guest speaker. So, I'm very pleased to introduce Guillaume Jacques, who is a sustainable finance analyst at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange. So, many thanks again for joining us, Guillaume. I think you should be able to share screens now. I'll just stop sharing mine, but I'll pass over to you.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you very much first to have me as a speaker today. I will try to share my screen indeed. And yes, to present a bit myself, I'm working at the Luxembourg Stock Exchange in the Green Exchange team. And I've been working with the exchange since more than 5 years now, and also worked in the listing teams beforehand. Mm, You should be able to see my screen. Okay. So yes, today my goal is to explain what are gender-focused bonds and to provide some examples for them. And it all started with this document. Just try to switch the slide. Oh, doing a bit of teasing at the same time. So this started with this document published by the International Capital Market Association, together with UN Women and IFC, in 2021, which is a practitioner's guide to using sustainable debt for gender equality. And the goal is to indeed give practical guidance on how to use sustainable bonds to credibly access financing that advances gender equality. So this serves two purposes, both on the issuer side and the investor side. For the issuers, the goal is to support new and existing bond issuers, but also all the stakeholders which are active in bond issuance to integrate gender equality objectives into sustainable investments. Regarding investors, the goal is to help them in understanding these products and to support also the projects which are financed by these products. The guide is explaining examples of gender-related use of proceeds bonds, but also key performance indicators and SPTs, but we will see that in the next slides. So what are gender-focused bonds? So there are two types of gender-focused bonds. The first one being use of proceeds bonds. So how do we identify them at LuxSE? So it's based on a methodology inspired by ICMA UN Women and IFC guidelines that we saw just before. Maybe first, what are use of proceeds bonds? And it was also well explained beforehand. But these bonds are either green, social, or sustainability bonds. So they finance green projects, social projects, or both. In the case of sustainability bonds. And in the case of gender-focused bonds, how do we identify them? So the first case is when 100% of the proceeds finance projects which are related to gender equality or which are related to women's empowerment. And then SDG 5, that's how we capture this. So the Sustainable Development Goal number 5, gender equality. So if 100% of the proceeds are used for this SDG 5, then we can already assess in pre-issuance that the bond is gender focused. And the second case is if the bond finances lots of different projects, or can, for example, finance renewable energy, clean transportation, or other projects. It can also finance gender-linked projects, but then if there are multiple projects, we will have to wait potentially 1 year for the post-issuance report to be published. And in this post-issuance report, we will make sure that at least a significant portion of the proceeds are used towards women. So just in one sentence, maybe to summarize, use of proceeds gender-focused bonds finance, at least with a significant portion of the proceeds, projects linked to SDG number 5. Now going to SLBs, so sustainability-linked bonds. First of all, what are sustainability-linked bonds? So these are bonds for which the financial characteristics are linked to specific targets. So, for example, with a gender-focused bond, it can be, for example, to reach 30% of women in the board, let's say, by 2030. If the company reaches this objective, then there may be no consequences, or the coupon, for example, could decrease. And if they miss the target, the coupon can increase, the redemption price can increase, or there can be other financial impacts on the bond. And for us on LGX to identify those bonds, there must be at least one KPI and SPT which targets SDG 5. So the KPI and the example that I gave would be women in the board, and the SPT would be to reach 30% of women in the board by 2030, let's say. So these are the two types of gender-focused bonds. And now I will provide you with a small video from a social bond issuance from a commercial bank in Tanzania, NMB Bank, on financing women-owned businesses. So I'll just go to the video. Let's go.
It's a commercial bank, universal commercial bank, based in Tanzania, East Africa, that serves retail clients, corporate clients, and government. I'm the treasurer for the bank. So main responsibility really is around mobilizing funds. So liquidity management, foreign exchange risk management, interest risk management, and coordination, just to make sure that there's balance sheet optimization and as well as capital allocation. So our gender bond really is a use of proceeds bond, that we issued in line with the international capital markets principles under the social bonds framework that allows us to raise money from the public and finance, women-owned businesses or enterprises that are dominantly owned by women, or businesses whose products and services actually eventually, service the female. Women proposition is a very important segment for our bank. And yes, we had a very fantastic proposition for women's savings, but we realized on the financing side, we need to do something to mobilize additional funding to support growth for women-owned businesses. So we felt it was necessary for us, because a strategic fit for us is really to diversify portfolio. And given the risk profile of women, as far as loans is concerned, we realized that the non-performing loans ratios are actually lower than that of the male counterparts. Yes, so the projects we tend to finance or that we're financing with these are predominantly female-owned enterprises, and it cuts across different sectors, be it renewable energy, agriculture, health, education, and manufacturing as well. Obviously, it would be interesting that we measure the number of new loans that are issued to MSEs, so micro to medium and small enterprises women. But also it would be interesting for us, and we're doing that, to measure what impact that is having on their social and economic life. So how many jobs are created? Are they growing? Are they not? Are they expanding their businesses? I think those kind of metrics are very important, and is part of our KPIs in ensuring that these funds actually put to the right use. Indeed, we've issued other types of bonds, retail bonds, corporate bonds. The difference with this interbond is that the use of proceeds requires a lot of transparency. Investors require that you go back to them to tell them, how these funds have been used. But in addition to that, it has to go in line with, the social bond principles and in line with the international capital markets, principle on social bonds. As opposed to the other bonds that you could simply raise and finance all manner of activities, without accountability to the investors. This requires significant accountability and transparency as far as investors are concerned. It was very well received by investors, domestic investors, and as well as international investors. As a matter of fact, it got 197% oversubscription. So we had significant appetite seeing from international financiers, but as well as domestic retail and corporate investors. I think one obvious one was the misconception, that you have a gender bond in the market, financing women, and therefore there's a perception that perhaps the bond subscribers were meant to be female. And so it requires a lot of efforts, marketing efforts, to ensure that the male counterparts actually understood that it's not just for female, but they could also invest to help advance female. So that was a key challenge for us. But the other one is obviously data quality, especially in some of these emerging markets, still remains to be an issue. So you need to capture the right data at onboarding stage becomes very important, because you really get to realize how critical that is when you're doing your impact measurement and reporting. But the other aspect is the opportunities are still huge. The financing gap for female generally is still quite huge, and that is why there's need for us perhaps also consider scaling up, such insurances, going forward. Yes, just related to the previous question. So we realize we need to do more still, so certainly we need to raise more funding, be it domestically, be it partnering with DFIs or developing financial institutions, to just make sure that we can scale up, that portfolio. The need is there. I think we need to answer a very critical question of affordability, which keeps coming up, and hopefully using things like guarantee schemes from some of these development financial institutions will enable us actually affordably extend credit to female entrepreneurs. I think critical for me, again, back to what I've said, is data, at the onboarding stage. You need to get it right. But at the same time, just ensuring that indeed you have a pipeline sufficient enough to be covered whatever amount of bonds you want to raise, because ultimately investors demand, that level of transparency and accountability to see that these bonds are actually put to the intended use.
Well, I hope this video was useful, but I personally think that it's really useful and very practical and on the specific social bond issuance, gender-focused bond issuance. Now, continue the presentation. So this is a bit the description of the bond, which was described in the video. I will not go into all the details in these slides. Maybe one important thing to mention here is that yes, 75% of women in Tanzania struggle to obtain access to finance. It's really more difficult for women to obtain loans. And thanks to this bond, over 2,000 women MSMEs, so women-owned or women-lent MSMEs, could get a loan. So basically, how it works is that the bond gathers some proceeds, and then the proceeds are used for the loans. As he mentioned also in the video, the bond was oversubscribed by almost 200%. So there was a clear and big demand for this bond. And it was the first gender bond in sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, that's basically it. And now for another case study, now for an SLB. So this was for a use of proceed bond. Now for an SLB. This is a bond from EQT AB Group, so a global investment firm. And they had three KPIs and those three SPTs, so key performance indicators and sustainable performance targets. One of the targets was linked to climate, and the two other ones were linked to gender equality and thus to SDG 5. So it was displayed as gender-focused bond on our exchange. One of the KPI was women investment advisory professionals, so to increase this share to 28% by 2026 versus 21% in 2020. And the second KPI was women independent board members appointed at certain EQT portfolio companies, so to appoint some women in these detained companies. And the SPT was to increase the share to 36% by 2026 versus an average of 21% in 2020. So these are two clear goals which are linked to SDG 5. And if those goals were missed, it's not written on the slide, but what could happen is that the coupon could be increased until maturity. So the goals go until 2026, as you saw, and the maturity is 2031. So maybe during 5 years, there could be an increase in the coupon, an increase in the interest paid to investors then. So this is very a good way to align the interests of the investors, but also to make sure that the bond is useful and impactful for women. And that is basically it for me. I don't know if you have some questions. I'll stop sharing my screen and look at the questions.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Guillaume. So I think we have had a question in from Alicia, I see, which says, thanks for sharing the case study. And she asked if there were any similar case studies on gender bonds from other countries in Africa that you might be aware of. So I don't know if you have any off the top of your head, but
I think there must be a lot of different case studies which can be looked into. Maybe one way, I don't have any in mind right now, by the way, but if you're interested in the topic, you can also look at the study that we released with 2X last September, and there must be a lot of case studies in this study, and it's easily to find it on our website.
great, thanks. I think we have the link to your page about gender bonds, so I'll just ask Landon if he wouldn't mind resharing that in the chat, but that's super, thanks. Thanks, Landon. And then one question came in from Simone. I wasn't actually sure if she was asking just more generally about bonds, but maybe I'll focus the question in a little bit more on gender bonds specifically. And I guess maybe we talked about it a little bit, but specifically, what would be the drivers for a company financially for issuing a gender bond as opposed to maybe a more generic type of bond?
If we're looking purely financially, I think it's also shown in the bond that which we saw in the video by NMB. There can be strong demand for these bonds. So it's really a differentiator compared to other bonds to have it gender focused. And if there is strong demand, usually the interest could be a bit lower, so less cost for the enterprise.
Great, thanks for explaining that. That's helpful. And then I think there was another question around case studies from Cheryl, but I suspect that's probably picked up by looking at the resources that you mentioned there. So maybe we can share. I think we've shared that link. So
Perfect.
examples of gender bonds for use by NGOs. Ah, okay. Yeah, sorry. So there's a question which was around whether are you aware that if NGOs would also use gender bonds, or perhaps is it more in the private sector? and governments?
Yes, I would say I don't think there are any case studies of NGOs issuing bonds. It's mostly corporates, but also SSAs, so sovereigns, agencies, and so on.
Okay, no problem. Thanks for clarifying that, Guillaume. Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again. It's always great to have your contribution to the program, so much appreciated.
You're very welcome, and thank you also.
Thank you. And just to let everyone know as well that you'll be able to access Guillaume's presentation from the page that we've shared with you a number of times in the chat with the link to today's session materials. So be sure to look there for some of the case studies that Guillaume shared with us. Okay, fantastic. So hopefully helped us to understand there really how different financial products are actually starting to incorporate gender and how we're seeing that come through in practice. So if there wasn't already reasons enough to tackle this, at a corporate level, obviously we can really see the financial market interest in this topic through that route as well. So we'll wrap up this unit and talk a little bit more about how we can see gender equality themed products being promoted in the market more generally. And so at the UN SSE, we did an assessment of how exchanges are working on this topic with their markets as part of our guidance for exchanges on gender equality. And we found really that there are two main ways that markets are promoting gender equality. So, firstly, through the promotion of participation in financial markets, and secondly, through the particular promotion of impact. So, let's have a little bit of a look at both of those now. So, starting by promoting participation in markets, what do we mean by that? Well, on both the supply side and the buy side, we're seeing the application of a gender lens in global markets to start to access and support underserved segments. So, on the sell side, we see markets promoting and supporting women-led businesses or female entrepreneurs. And for example, a good case study on this is Sourcing to Equal, which is an IFC-led initiative in partnership with the Women's Entrepreneurs Finance Initiative and Norway. And that Sourcing to Equal project aims to connect 5,000 women entrepreneurs to new markets through corporate procurement practices. So helping those entrepreneurs and business owners to access financing. And on the buy side, on the investor side, we can also see investment in and support of women traders as well. And so this relates back to what we talked about earlier in terms of the different gender lens investment strategies we might see. And these are being undertaken not just at the portfolio level, but also at the firm level as well. And this is because it's been well documented that all male investment teams are likely to invest in fewer women-led businesses. So it's important that we have female perspectives, women's perspective as investors too. One example of this type of promotion is an annual women-focused investment summit, which is run by the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and they call that JSE She Invests. And so this event provides not only a networking opportunity for women, but also covers a variety of topics such as financial and investment literacy and showcases different ways in which women can participate in and invest in markets as well. And so, as well as promoting gender equal participation in markets, we also saw in our study that exchanges and markets promote financial products and companies based on their impact or their ability to really improve gender equality, either within an organization or in society more broadly. And so here we're seeing markets starting to raise more awareness of financial products and promote listed products through awards or incentives. And this really has the objective of shining a spotlight on those that are having the most positive impact. And we also see markets starting to create segments or indices that aim to make it easier to find and invest in these high impact stocks or financial products as well. And so, as I mentioned there, one thing we're starting to see is more different indices. So you see an example here of the Euronext Gender Equality Index, as well as the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index. And so what's important to note is that different indices can vary between each other. So in order to truly capture the holistic picture, which we know from our session earlier in the week is important on this topic, we do have to look at this from many different perspectives. So, for example, if these indices were only collecting information on women on boards, This would, of course, only let us know about one aspect of gender equality within a company. In some instances, that might be what we want to know, but if we're investing with the objective of either directing capital towards companies that enhance gender-related equality goals, or because we understand the value of enhanced gender equality, then we're going to want a much broader range of information to help us make those decisions. However, we can see on these two indices here, the types of information that they're asking for are quite similar. But it's important that we're starting to keep these in mind when we're thinking about setting up our own reporting and measurement processes, that we're keeping this investor perspective in mind and what financial markets may want to know about our gender equality practices. So, as we learned last time as well, sometimes we might think that we're solving a problem or improving gender equality, but we might not necessarily be targeting the right things, or we could even possibly be making it worse. And so that's really where getting a thorough understanding of what's happening in our organization across these different areas is an important way to help us tackle that problem. Okay, so we'll do a quick Zoom poll now just to recap on some of the points that we've covered in this segment and close things off. And after that, we'll take a quick break. So let me launch that poll for you now, which is just asking around what do you think the reasons are that investors are looking for gender-related investment opportunities? And there could be more than one correct answer here, so feel free to select as many of these as you think might be drivers for investors to be looking at this topic. I'll just give everyone maybe a minute or so to respond to that, because a little bit of reading, of course, on those different options. So yeah, feel free to take a few seconds and have a think. Okay. Give us a couple more seconds before we close the poll. Let's close it there. So I'll share those results with you. So you can see we voted across a range of different things here, but most of you correctly identified that that fourth option there is the only one that's incorrect here. So indeed, of course, the aim here is not to prevent men from moving forward so that women can instead. And if this is the outcome, then we're not necessarily approaching this correctly. But indeed, all of those other areas are things that investors might bear in mind when they're starting to think about gender-related investing. And on that climate related point, I know less people highlighted that one, but if you remember from what we talked about with some of the research and the case studies we've used, there's actually quite a lot of evidence of co-benefits between climate related impacts and gender equality impacts. So we do see quite a few projects coming through that can serve both of those objectives together. So that's just an interesting observation. And I think the studies that we shared in the first part of the training on Monday as well does show evidence that actually organizations with greater levels of female leadership and representation, there's a relationship between that fact and their environment and sustainability performance as well. So obviously just a correlation, and there's a lot of factors at play there, but an interesting possibility that actually female leaders may indeed be driving change in that regard. Great. Thanks everyone for sharing your thoughts there. So this brings us up then to the end of our first part of the training. So really focusing there on that gender lens to financing and how we're really starting to see that play out in some different types of case study. So hopefully for those of you who are here as a company perspective, it's interesting and relevant for you to see that there are real examples of how focusing on this topic can help you to access new financial products, or perhaps feature in certain indices, or access new investors as well, or build better relationships with the investors that you have. And for those of you perhaps coming from a finance perspective, maybe you're already thinking about this, but if you're not, obviously it's a growing market and one that you might want to get involved in. Okay, great. We'll take our break there. So, same approach as last time. We'll play you our relaxing music for 5 minutes. So, feel free to step away from your desk and have a little refresh. But equally, if you've had any more questions come to mind from what we've covered, feel free to share those with us as well. And we'll see you back in 5 minutes' time. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you had the chance to at least stretch your legs or grab a cup of coffee or tea, but we'll move right along so that we make sure we wrap up on time. So we've had a look at some of the financial instruments available to promote gender equality. Now we're going to have a look at how an organization can communicate about their performance on gender equality, which can be one means of accessing these gender specific financing mechanisms. However, it's not only important for communicating with investors on your impact, but also internal communication within your firm. It's key to ensure that culture change that we repeated last Monday as well as again today. And it's, of course, a necessary aspect of performance, and that this culture change actually takes place. So our final unit of this training has two main sections. We'll talk both about communication and transparency within an organization, among its employees, as well as with external stakeholders. To start with, let's look at how you can manage communication with suppliers. Well, there's many methods available and able to be used to enhance transparency within an organization. What we want to highlight today is the concept of gender responsive procurement as a tool for advancing gender equality, not just in your own organization, but also within the wider marketplace. To help guide us on this, I'm happy to have here with us a colleague from UN Women, Miwa Park, who will discuss the tools provided by the WEPS team to support you on this topic. I'll turn it over to you now, Miwa.
Thank you, Landon. Good morning, everyone. It's really great seeing all of you again. So let me begin by telling you why the business case. So while it's important for an organization to communicate their performance on gender equality, the Web Secretariat also encouraged companies to go a step further to engage their suppliers. When people hear about the word supplier engagement, they often associate it with compliance and requirements. But today, I'm going to take a look at communication from a slightly different angle on how to communicate and engage with your suppliers. Supplier engagement on gender equality is critical because a company's impact extends far beyond its immediate operations and into the value chain. By promoting gender equality among suppliers, businesses strengthen suppliers' performance, ensure their compliance with the law, and build more resilient, inclusive value chain. In doing so, they turn shared values into measurable impact, benefiting both businesses and society. Supplier engagement is about partnerships, support, and mutual benefit. Companies can set the tone by clearly communicating expectations, assessing where suppliers stand, and then providing practical tools, incentives, and support to help them improve. So when we talk about gender responsive procurement at WEPS, we mean by fostering a gender responsive ecosystem. So when web signatories purchase from the other web signatories, they enhance their supplier diversity, but also contribute to reducing systematic discrimination. By doing so, companies can multiply their impact on gender equality, enhance again their supplier diversity, and reduce systematic discrimination. So we encourage and guide web signatories to systematically source their goods and services from other enterprises that align with the webs. Pursuing GRP can enhance suppliers' opportunities to grow, gain exposure to business networks, high value market opportunities, and sustainable revenue streams. So before you engage and communicate with your suppliers, it's important to understand where your company stands and when it comes to gender responsive procurement. So the GRP assessment tool is a self-assessment tool for the web signatories to use to assess their progress on their gender responsive procurement policies and practices. This tool helps companies to advance gender equality in their marketplace by providing opportunity to assess if the company's procurement policies and practices are gender responsive. We have been encouraging our signatories to take it and even take it further to encourage your suppliers to take this to create an impact for the whole ecosystem. The GRP assessment tool comprises of 31 questions covering 5 main themes, which are gender equality commitment, procurement policy and strategy, internal procurement and supply chain management department, supplier database and data reporting, and supplier engagement and diversification. So based on the data you provide, you will receive a scorecard that highlights some gaps and areas for improvement, similar to the Web's gender gap analysis tool from beginner, improver, achiever to leader. So the data that you enter into this tool will be treated strictly confidential, and the result will never be linked to an individual company or divulged to the public. So moving on. Okay, so just like developing an action plan, consultation and communication is key in this process also. Listen to your internal stakeholders and ask questions to your suppliers. The first step would be securing company-wide commitment and support. Communicate internally on your company's GRP maturity level and goals. Use specific numbers, targets, and time frame and seek support. Second step is to ensure diverse teams and build their capacity. Ensure your company's procurement team is on board with gender equality and understand gender responsive procurement. The diversity of the team is also about having both women and men buyers that may understand diverse suppliers. Next step is set performance target and track result. Based on the assessment result that your company got, you can create a GRP action plan with specific performance targets. You can monitor and track records. Fourth step is mapping your suppliers. This is where external communication piece comes in. Map your suppliers and learn more about them. Are they a web signatory? Is this company owned by women or led by women? Another step is engaging with current and future suppliers to adopt the women's empowerment principles and help them build their capacity on gender equality. After you map your suppliers, engage with them to share your company's stance on gender equality and help them understand the importance of them being part of this movement. So in 2023, we conducted a global pilot project with a group of watch and jewelry companies to test the GRP assessment tool that I just explained about. This was an opportunity for us to learn about gender equality leaders in the workplace. Still had room for a lot of improvement when it comes to gender equality in the marketplace, and that this is a new area of work for most companies. We have identified several gaps that gathering sex-disc aggregated data on their supplier was not a widely practiced activity, and gender responsive procurement wasn't integrated into the core business strategy of these companies, and of course, the lack of KPIs to track progress. Having identified those gaps and challenges, we also have developed a set of recommendations that can be useful for those companies who are starting out this journey. The first one that I like to share is to develop standalone gender responsive procurement policies, strategy, and action plans with clear annual indicators and targets. When doing so, again, consult with your internal and external stakeholders, including your suppliers. So, second recommendation is related to the first point. Ensure effective support in the GRP implementation and monitor progress, including through surveys and consultation. Next one is empowering employees through trainings, such as GRP training, so you can enlighten them about the business rationale and guiding them towards tangible and concrete steps in reshaping current practices to be more gender responsive. And actively seek out women for procurement roles, including influential managerial and executive procurement positions. Next one is collecting sex disaggregated data and report regularly on the progress that your company have made. Transparency could serve as a linchpin to propel advancement on gender equality and women's empowerment. Last is engage your suppliers on gender equality and women's empowerment. Encourage them to sign the webs again, or encourage them to build their capacity. And when time comes, report on their progress on gender equality and women's empowerment. So I hope today's session has inspired you to go back to your company to take a step towards advancing gender equality through gender responsive procurement. Just imagine what an impact it could have for your company, for your suppliers, and for your business community, and for the society at large. You're one action away from becoming a GRP pioneer. Thank you, and now I'll hand it over to Landon.
Great. Thank you again, Miwa, for that really helpful overview on gender responsive procurement and some really useful action steps you can also take So moving along, now that we've covered engaging suppliers through gender responsive procurement, we're going to move along and focus on communicating more widely to external stakeholders. To kick this off, we're going to do a quick Zoom poll that I'll launch in 1 second to see how your organizations are currently doing in terms of disclosing gender-related information. Oh, thank you. So as you're filling this in, so essentially we're looking for, does your company disclose gender-related information through one or more of these mechanisms? So you can also choose all that apply. As you're filling this in, feel free to let us know in the chat. What do you think determines where gender-related information should appear? What do you think determines if it should be in an annual financial report, a gender pay gap report, company's ESG, CSR, or sustainability report? If you have any ideas, we'd love to hear it in the chat box. So I'll give you a few seconds. I'm just going to look at the answers coming in. Okay, so so right now, about a third are saying none of the above, and a third are not sure. So I'll end the poll there, and you can see, excuse me, you can see what I'm looking at as well. So yeah, about 36% none of the above, 36% not sure. So hopefully after the trainings today and Monday, we can get both of those numbers much lower. I encourage you to reach out to any of your contacts in your firm to see where this information is being disclosed, and if it's not, to be an advocate for the information being collected, disaggregated, and disclosed. Now, who you communicate to defines where you report and what standard you will use. I'm not sure if anyone was able to share any thoughts in the chat. I was looking at the poll, but identifying your audience is quite important to decide how you report. So if you're reporting to investors, the primary location for your gender-related disclosures will be in your annual report. The ISSB has consolidated the major investor-oriented sustainability disclosure standards. And for reporting to other stakeholders, you might want to use the GRI standards, which are widely used by organizations globally. But together, these two can form a holistic reporting package to a wide range of stakeholders. Now, going back to that question I posed to you a minute ago, when we're looking at where to disclose different information. In terms of the content for each type of audience, for investors, you might focus your disclosure more on financially material risks and opportunities related to gender equality, as well as any other information that can help investors in their investment decisions and engagement with the company. As I said, this would go into your annual report along with your financial statements and other disclosures. To communicate to a broader stakeholder group, you would report more about the impact of your business on the environment, society, and economy at large, as this will be more in line with what they would want to know. At the same time, this information will be useful to some of your investors as well, and it will support the information you reported in that annual financial report. A quick note on ISSB standards. So when you're reporting to investors in the annual financial report, the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards, or ISSB, requires your organizations to disclose in 4 broad areas, which you may already recognize if you were aware of the previous TCFD, or Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. The ISSB S1 standard requires an entity to disclose information about all sustainability-related risks and opportunities that could reasonably be expected to affect the entity's cash flows, its access to finance, or cost of capital over the short, medium, or long term. Now, the ISSB doesn't yet provide specific metrics or disclosure requirements on gender equality, but they do highlight that companies should make use of the SASB standards and GRI standards to identify appropriate disclosures for sustainability-related risks and opportunities. I mentioned GRI a moment ago. So when we're looking at multi-stakeholder reporting, we went through here at the SSE GRI standards and identified those that look most directly at addressing gender equality to hopefully help you to know where to find guidance on gender equality disclosures for your sustainability reports. With that, we see gender-related disclosures are a part of disclosures on employees with 2-7, government structure and composition, policy commitments, and approach to stakeholder engagement. And you can see the references of the particular GRI 2 standard on the slide here, and you'll be able to find further information on these disclosures in the slide handout as well. Now, as you may know, GRI has already transitioned to its new modular structure with the revised universal standards introduced a few years ago in 2021, and guidance from the 2016 standards can still provide valuable context. Although sector and topic standards are in various stages of development and revisions, they continue to offer important insights for materiality assessments and reporting. So if we look at the reporting requirements for both GRI 405, which is on diversity and equal opportunity, as well as GRI 406 on non-discrimination, we see a few additional guidelines on disclosure of gender-related information. In these guidelines, it's recommended that the reporting organization shall report its management approach for diversity and equal opportunity using GRI 103 management approach. I'll note GRI 202-1 also requires you to disclose ratios of standard entry level wage by gender compared to local minimum wage. So I know that's a lot of talk about standards, which is not always everyone's cup of tea. But if it was a bit overwhelming with all the standards and numbers thrown at you with standards, do check out the handout where you'll get some more information. And if you're a better learner by kind of case studies, we do have some case studies now for you that hopefully will help you see a little bit more real world practicality of disclosure. So we've looked at the standards, and now let's see the practice. So these examples are just excerpts from actual reports, so they only present a piece of a bigger complete picture. They're examples of current practice, and we're not passing judgment on them as to whether or not they're good or bad practices. So first, we're going to look at Airtel Africa, a Nigerian telecommunications company. So in line with the IFRS Sustainability Disclosure Standards requirement, they reported about the processes they use to monitor, manage, and oversee their sustainability related performance. Airtel noted the non-financial performance KPIs linked to their sustainability strategy include gender diversity, and within their governance report, they also go into further detail on the specific initiatives and actions overseen by the board and its committees in the reporting year. They also note the role of the nominations committee in reviewing executive remuneration. They also note that these KPIs are linked to the board's remuneration, which I always think is a pretty strong incentive for actors in the company at almost all levels to take that seriously. The next example on disclosure I want to discuss with you is on strategy. So strategy disclosures aim to help the readers of your report to understand your strategy for managing sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So here we see the sustainability report of Astra International, an Indonesian conglomerate. Astra outlines the importance of the diversity of its employees to its success. Importantly, the statement is then backed up by a roadmap and other actions to manage the opportunity they see through a gender diverse workforce. Alongside this, Astra also goes into further details about how the company is implementing this, for example, through programs to make the workplace more suitable for women and through its Women's Leader Development Program and its Women's Network Program for the wider workforce. I'll point out that interestingly, they say that human capital development covers three focus areas, which are to build an agile organization, develop passionate and energetic leaders so as to be able to navigate the organization in facing business challenges, as well as carrying out the culture of continuous improvement and innovation to maintain Astra's relevancy in the era of disruptions. So that's a lot of kind of business speak, but in other words, Astra International is stating that a more diverse and gender equal business can help maintain the company's relevancy during an era of disruption. So I think this is an interesting insight into their strategic approach to gender equality. Now, I have a couple more examples, so I'll try to move through them relatively quickly. But if I move along too quick, again, the handout slides are there for you. So this is an example disclosure on risk management, and we're looking at L'Oréal, the French cosmetic company's annual report, prepared in alignment with the European Sustainability Reporting Standards, or ESRS. As a reminder, risk management disclosures are intended to help the reader of the report to understand your processes to identify, assess, prioritize, and monitor sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So here, L'Oréal provides an overview of how they go about identifying material impacts, risks, and opportunities using a double materiality lens, which includes the financial or investor materiality perspective of the ISSB. In the disclosure, they explain the process they have used to identify and assess material topics, including specific issues relating to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including the stakeholder groups consulted as part of their process. For each material subtopic related to DE&I, they identified the policies and action plans in place to manage that risk or impact area. Finally, we have here a disclosure example on reporting gender-related metrics and targets used by Cemex, who are a Mexican multinational cement company. Cemex also noted in their annual report that they're a signatory of the UN WEPs, as well as the UN Global Compact's Target Gender Equality, and they're also EDGE certified, which we'll hear a bit more about EDGE shortly. So in this example, we see Cemex updating on the progress made towards gender equality in its workforce. For context, Cemex is in an industry that has been traditionally male-dominated, and therefore it's starting from a lower percentage of women than perhaps a company from another less traditionally male-dominated industry. This example still shows, however, that any business can take action towards gender equality. Cemex set a new goal to increase the representation of women in senior management positions. They specify the base year being 2022, their target being 30% women in senior management positions, and their target year of 2030, which is some solid goal setting. Later on in the report, they also report on metrics such as percentage of workforce by gender, percentage of female employees by position, and women to men remuneration ratio, including by region. This is a good example of sex disaggregated metrics, and that helps Cemex and their stakeholders to better understand progress towards its overall long-term goal to increase women's representation in the organization and hopefully hit their 2030 goal. Now, we've talked a bit about metrics and disclosures, and we recently released a new report just last year that provides the first comprehensive comparative assessment of gender-related disclosure metrics issued by stock exchanges and standard setters worldwide. So I encourage you to take a couple minutes to check that report out if this is of any interest to you, which I'm sure it is for actually everyone on the call. So in addition to the standards we discussed, there's also additional organizations that you can look to for more guidance on the topic. There's the guiding principles for you to consider from UNGC, such as the UN Charter of Human Rights, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the UN WEPs, or the UNGC's target as well. In addition, it's always important to know what disclosures are required of your organization by law. Beyond this, there's also a number of rankings or benchmarks to consider, such as those of the World Benchmarking Alliance. There's also a number of indices and rating agencies that take into account the social performance. There's the Bloomberg Gender Equality Index and a number of other related gender equality related financial benchmarks and indices that you can also check out our gender themed products report to learn a little bit more on. Finally, there's also management standards that your organization may wish to adopt, which can help enhance your organization's performance on gender equality. You can have a look at ISO 26000, Guidance on Social Responsibility, where gender equality is also present, as well in many other ISO standards. There's also the SDG impact standards. Those are management practice standards designed to guide businesses and investors in embedding sustainability into their decision-making approaches. So hopefully this provides an overview of some of the disclosure guidelines you can consider. But previously, we also talked about standards and certifications that can be used to develop your organization's gender equality practices and disclosures. And with that, we're very happy to have here with us today the Managing Director of EDGE Certified Foundation to tell us more about this. So the floor is yours, David. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Happy, Landon, to be invited. Thanks a lot for the invitation, and nice to see everyone and see so many people joining the webinar on this. Wow, it was a hugely valuable run through of all the different standards, frameworks, directives, guidelines. I mean, it's a real. There's so much information. There's so many different types of these standards and frameworks. My take on this is that each and every one could be interesting or relevant for any particular organization. It depends on the purpose of what you're trying to achieve. You saw, I think, a lot of the reporting standards. So if it's really a disclosure related requirement that you're looking at, from a stock exchange perspective, then they're definitely the best one to look at. The UNSSE report is hugely valuable in that perspective, giving a benchmark of across different stock exchanges of the core gender metrics. Where EDGE operates, and I'll talk about EDGE just now for about 10 minutes, is much more on the management style standard. So it comes before the reporting standard. So for an organization who is interested in understanding what makes an equitable talent management process, what helps to form equitable career pipelines, what helps to drive equitable workplaces and fair decision making within an organization. What metrics should you measure? What policies and practices should you put in place? And how do you survey employee experiences, for example? It's a little bit of an ISO plus, I guess. ISO standards tend to focus on management systems a little bit more in terms of what policies do you have, what do the management systems kind of prescribe that an organization does, with a little bit of data on the side. What EDGE does is provide an assessment framework for organizations who want to measure where they stand on gender equality in the workplace, from a talent management perspective, looking at data, policies and practices, and employee experiences and perceptions, because we think that real element of experience and perceptions of the employees really drives the inclusivity angle of the diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective. But let me go through a little bit what EDGE is about, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. EDGE is an ecosystem. We're an independent third-party system, a little bit like some of the sustainable supply chain management systems that you may operate in your organizations. Those of you that are in the agricultural business will probably be working with a lot of these in the food products or the metal products or the forestry products and things like that, where there's a lot of these sort of sustainability systems with performance standards which are audited by independent third-party audits. That's how we operate. I work in the foundation which sets the standards. We have developed a holistic framework of standards and measures to assess an organization's performance in the workplace. And then organizations themselves who are interested in that, they would have to work with commercial aspects of Edge, either Edge Strategy or one of our licensed partners, such as the IFC, who use our methodology in their portfolio of organizations when they're assessing gender equality in the workplace, and then going through the capacity building aspects on the back of that. Very quickly on what it entails, just to give you a sense of what we're looking at. We look at representation, so the data side of things. We look at 12 different value drivers of representation at different levels of hierarchy and different job types. So we really have identified what drives certain recruitment and promotion decisions. What does performance management look like? What does professional development and training look like from a gender representation basis? What does the top talent management look like? Parental leave look like? The mentorship, sponsoring, the part-time work, full-time work, flexible working opportunities. All these things we look at from a gender representation basis to see how the makeup of the organization is looking. We assess pay equity as a key component of gender and intersectional equity. And then, as I mentioned, we look at an organization's policies, practices, and we look at the inclusiveness of the culture. So what we're doing is we're triangulating data with infrastructure or architecture elements with the employee's experience. So what are the employees saying about what they think that company does? Well, here is what the company says that they think they're doing, and here is really the output in terms of the impact of the data to see if actually it reflects the reality of the client situation. So it's quite a nice triangulation of an assessment to understand where the gaps are that an organization can work on if they want to pursue certain goals in gender equality. We have 3 levels of performance, 4 levels of performance, which are certification levels, starting at Edge Assess, which recognizes commitment. So any organization going through the Edge system will be certified at one of the 4 levels. The lowest level is attainable for everybody who goes through the assessment because it recognizes the commitment to assess where an organization stands and to put in place an impactful action plan to work on continuous improvement progress over time. It's a 2-year certification cycle so that an organization can reassess where they stand 2 years later, benchmark their performance against others, and benchmark their performance against where they were 2 years ago. We have standards in gender equality. These are those 4. And then we have a standard in Edge Plus, which is the intersectional element of the certification system for showcasing commitment to intersectional equity, which means that you would assess the gender binary within an organization, and then you would, in addition, assess the gender and intersectionality. You can use one of 6 different dimensions in diversity to assess the makeup of an organization and maybe some of the challenges and the hurdles of inclusivity that an organization may want to overcome. Let me briefly just show you what this looks like for an organization, just in summary. I know this is quite small, the information on this slide, but you will have it in the handout to take away with you, or it'll be on the website that you can download. Edge works with organizations across 77 countries, 50 different sectors. It's one standard, and it's a one standard fits all. So there's no changing the standard for each geography or each sector. We really think that there's a common baseline and standard that can be made for gender equality in the workplace that everyone should be striving to. As Landon said earlier, CEMEX potentially they start on representation a little bit lower in their industry sector, but it doesn't mean that they can't put in place certain targets to help to achieve progress over a period, even if the level, the magnitude of those targets may be less than someone like L'Oreal, who's in the personal products business, who has an easier job of attracting maybe women workers into the workforce and promoting those up to senior management level. But anyway, here's the example of an energy industry organization who's worked with us over 6 years. They've been through the whole analysis. This is a reflection here of the representation of the different levels of management. As I said, there's 4 different levels of management we look at. When they first started working with us, they had women's share of management was significantly less than 30%. We set 30% as a required minimum to meet certain standards within the EDGE system, and as a target that organizations should try to reach should they be below that. At each level, obviously looking at the proportionality and the retention of women in the workplace as you go up the ladder, which is often a common problem for many organizations. This organization was heavily dominated by men, and the client wanted to really try to bring women into their talent pipelines and to make sure that they were implementing fair promotion practices for women, because they were losing them throughout the management cycle. And they wanted to also help the organization be supported by flexible working policies and practices, and parental leave, fair parental leave solutions for the organization. They managed to do this over a 6-year period. So in 2024, they saw their gender representation at different levels of management increase quite significantly, which was a lot of work from their side. They did a lot of work around the recruitment, but also their promotional practices to making sure that things were fair, because they identified that for example, from a performance management perspective, women were performing as high, or if not higher, to a higher degree than men, but they weren't getting the same level of promotion. So there was obviously some discrimination and some bias happening in promotion processes, which they were able to unblock, as well as in recruitment processes where they actually broadened their scope of where they looked for new recruits. They had traditionally looked in specific areas, and obviously through our system we help them to encourage them and to put in place some measures for them to look more broadly to attract different employees. So that was what we got to see. Another one which is a little bit different in the finance industry. Finance industry has another set of challenges. This organization worked with us over 2 years, and they really wanted to help bolster the maturity of their policies and practices. So here you see the 5 areas of the core areas of where policies and practices are assessed in the EDGE assessment. The organization was scoring below a threshold of 65% of maturity, which is how we score the 32 kind of questions which go across these 5 focus areas through a dedicated action plan and a cycle and a commitment of improving their policies practices. They were able to gain significant maturity, and that maturity is now helping them to move the data, because they needed to move the policies practices to get to a bit more mature level, to be more specific about non-discrimination, including gender and other elements of diversity in their policies, in their pay policies, their professional development training policies, etc., and the practices that they undertake to support those policies. And that's led to this change. It's also hoped, obviously, that their employee perceptions will follow, and the employees will get positive experience on the back of that. So those are just two examples of sort of in practice. These are the kind of organizations that work with us. We have more than 1,000 certificates right now with large organizations in 77 countries. As I said, it's very, very global. It's aligned, and it maps quite well to the different reporting frameworks and mechanisms. So we adopt a lot of the indicators from the GRI, for example. We align to the UN Women empowerment principles for the most part, because we look at only within the workplace, and obviously the UN WEPs go a little bit broader than that. We also align to the ESRS, which is supporting the EU directives at the moment, and many of the other global frameworks which Landon talked about earlier. So that's a little bit the EDGE system in 10 to 15 minutes.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that summary, David. Oh, I see a well-timed question has just come in. So I had one for you, but we'll prioritize getting what the participants want to answer first. So I see Matma's asked about that there are currently 3 certification bodies accredited by EDGE. They've mentioned their company's a WEP signatory and interested to join EDGE as a certification body. So I guess they'd like to know a little bit more information about how organizations would go about becoming an EDGE certification body.
Yeah, really good question. We do work with certification bodies. As we work across 77 countries, we've selected certification bodies that have the global reach to be able to perform audits against the EDGE criteria in all those organizations. So we look for the ones with the global footprint, and the ones that we've selected do have that global footprint. So Intertek, SGS, and FlowCert. But those three certification bodies do take on contracting auditors in some markets, because obviously they don't have necessarily operations in each and every country. They usually have regional operations, and sometimes they're looking for auditors with specific language skills or specific social auditing skills to supplement their employees who are able to do the edge work from a central basis. So if you do have the capacity to reach out to any of these three, you're interested in this, reach out to them directly. You'll find the contact information on the Edge certification website. In the footer of the website, you'll see that there's the links to the three certification bodies, and you can contact them directly and show interest in becoming an auditor, for example, and they can tell you about the availability and the training that would need to happen for that to take place.
Perfect. Thank you. That's a really useful response and sounds like a good suggestion for our colleague there. So encourage them to check that option out. And then my question, it was actually something one of the participants had asked us about earlier, and around intersectionality. And I guess in the context, obviously, of Edge Plus, and you mentioned obviously having that option for companies to approach gender and intersectionality holistically. I wonder if you could just say a little bit more for the participants about how the Edge Plus standards worked, and maybe what are some of the challenges or maybe benefits been for companies in taking more of that intersectional approach?
Excellent. Yeah, very happy to. Edge Plus, so it's a standard which we introduced about 6 years ago. We started to develop this based on client demand. This was really coming from organizations who felt that there were obstacles and hurdles in the workplace which were not just related to gender, but they could be related to gender and race, ethnicity. They could be related to gender and age, or gender and sexual orientation, or gender identity, or socioeconomic background, which we've now introduced as well. And through research with our academic and scientific council, we've obviously ensured that this is backed up by a certain amount of research, which do show empirical studies that there are indeed hurdles within organization and sometimes systemic hurdles within organizations in career pipelines and talent management, which relate to gender and intersectional dimensions. And to do that, we've introduced that standard. It's difficult. As I mentioned, we have the three sources of information. It's very difficult for organizations to get the data sometimes. It depends on the dimension of diversity. Obviously, age is one which is fairly readily available. In some markets, race, ethnicity is also a common element which is tracked by HR systems, but in many jurisdictions, it's actually not allowed. It's many European ones, for example, with a history of going back to different wars, etc. They won't allow organizations to collect data on race, ethnicity, or other personally sensitive, as they call it, dimensions. So what an organization does generally for the EDGE certification is they run a survey with all their employees, where employees can identify themselves. So it's self-identification measure where you would have different control variables for different dimensions, and then you can test a little bit the experiences of the employees in fairness in recruitment and promotion, fairness in pay, fairness in flexible working practices, fairness in the organizational cultural elements, and fairness in training, leadership training and development, for example. And that's a nice way to kind of get a sense of some of the urgent topics which you may be blinded to by not having policies and not addressing directly, because you don't have the data to really know what those issues could be. So it's a nice way in if you don't have the data itself.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think that's a really useful next step to highlight for organizations interested to explore that. So thanks so much. So yeah, and Aria, I think who asked that question, said thanks very much for that
Stop
insight.
sharing.
Brilliant. So, well, thanks very much, David. I think those were all the questions we had, but yeah, really appreciate your time and joining us and for sharing that with the participants.
Thanks, everyone.
No problem. Okay, great. Well, we're getting close, everyone, to the end of the session. So let me just reshare the slides now, and we'll kind of really start to wrap things up from here. I think just to reflect really from what we've heard today, it would be interesting to revisit that question we had in Menti at the start around how well we understand these different aspects of the topic of gender and finance. So we've got another Menti, not Zoom, I'm on Zoom, Menti question for you there, just to get a sense from everyone as to how you feel about that. So let's see. I'm seeing the people who've responded are feeling very confident so far. So that's great. Don't worry if you're not quite up at the eights and nines on the scale. We know that there's a lot to get into here. So, of course, this might not be the only time you spend working on this topic and getting to understand it better. But hopefully, it's been a good starting point to build your understanding. And through those case studies and examples we've showed, we some really practical steps, hopefully, to think about how to take this forward in that space. Lovely. I'll leave everyone to continue voting on that. But yeah, great to see that those who've responded are feeling a little bit more comfortable than perhaps where they were at the start of the session. But I'll just return and recap a few kind of final slides to share with you some resources and some information about next steps regarding your certificates as well. Really the one thing obviously we wanted to continue to remind you of is that all of these resources and the content from our presentation, from our guest speakers, and all of the links that we've shared are included in the slide handout that you can download from the page that Landon has just shared the link to in the chat. So if you scroll to the bottom of that page, you will see there all of the different resources we've mentioned. There's also a further document there which includes a number of academic studies on the importance of gender equality, the impact it can have on organizations. So if you're looking for a little bit of an evidence base to build your business case around this issue, be sure to check that out as well. Following the training, we'll also be adding the recording of this session to that page alongside the recording of Monday as well. So be sure to share that with any colleagues you think who might benefit from learning more about this topic. And just to show you what is included in the slide handout, for each of the different units of our training, we'll have a summary here of all of the different reports that we discuss and some of the tools you can use as well. So that's consolidated at the end of the presentation. So I'll just flip through that there so that you're aware of that being available in your handout. And then finally, just to mention our partner and great supporter for this program, the IFC, part of the World Bank Group, have a great program called Beyond the Balance Sheet, which collates a broader set of resources relating to sustainability, governance, and reporting as well, including some resources focused on women's equality. So be sure to check out these materials from the IFC if you're interested to know more about that. And then that brings us around to what I know is an important topic, which is our appreciation for you and certificate. So we're really grateful for the time you've taken to join us in today's training. And so we'll be able to send out a certificate to everyone who's joined us live in the training session on behalf of the SSE, IFC, and our partners. And in order to receive your certificate, what you'll need to do is to complete the feedback survey. And so Landon's just shared the link in the chat with you to access that survey. And if you miss that link there, it's just available to you now, but you will also get it in an email from Zoom 24 hours after today's session as well. So keep an eye out from that email from Zoom to all of the participants who joined us today, and you'll get an access to that survey as well. We ask if you can aim to fill out the survey within around a week of taking part in the training Clinial, but there's no firm deadline on that. Just make sure to put in the date that you took part in the training when you fill out the survey. But once you've taken part in the survey, obviously for one, we'd love to know your feedback on the programme. So do please feel free to share your thoughts with us there as well. And then what we'll do is we'll send out certificates to everyone who takes part in that survey at the email address you provide us with there. So it can take up to a week to receive your certificate. So please be patient if you haven't received it in that time frame. And also make sure to check your spam or junk folders because sometimes the certificates can end up there. In fact, if you maybe are using a corporate email address and you know that you do have quite an aggressive spam filtering policy, it might be a good idea to use maybe a personal email address like a Gmail, etc., in case of any blockage of receiving the email with the survey as well. But if you do have any problems after a week or so, you can reach out to the SSE team at the contact details we include in this presentation if you have any problems. Great, and you can see the contact details for each of the organizations partnering on this program. So if you've got any questions for us, please feel free to reach out. And the same for our guest speakers who've included their details in their presentations available on the webpage as well. But as we're coming to the end of the session, just to say a big thank you once again to our guest speakers today, to Guillaume and David for their contributions. And of course, a big thank you to the SSE supporters who helped to make this program possible with their support to the UNSSE. And then finally, with a particular focus on today's training, a big thank you to the UN Women team and especially to MIWA for joining us, to our partners IFC Colombia and the government of Luxembourg, and of course a big thank you to the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange, to Ava, Joy, Natasha, and all of their team who've supported and helped bring everyone together in today's training session, and indeed to all of the interesting insights you as participants have shared with us as we've taken part in the training as well. We've really valued your contributions and discussions. So we'll close off our session there, but a big thank you again. We really hope that you've got something out of this training session and our time together, and we'll hope to see you on a future SSE training session. So thanks everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your week.